Hi, everyone, and welcome to Human Centered, a new podcast series brought to you by VMLY&R. I'm Nick Brunker, a director of experience strategy and your host for the show. We're glad you're with us. Thanks for listening. On every episode of Human Centered, we explore how brands, both large and small, are creating meaningful customer experiences and discuss how professionals like you can tap into CX best practices to create value and gain traction in transforming your business. Great discussion on tap today. We'll chat about the evolving landscape of commerce in the experience era and chat a bit about how brands can keep up with this pace of rapid change. To help us do that, I'm excited to be joined by Executive Vice President of VMLY&R Commerce and our co-lead of our Cincinnati office, Jacquelyn Baker, or as she's more commonly known around here, JB. Welcome, JB.
Hi, Nick. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here.
To be here.
Yeah, same here. Before we dive in, tell us a bit about you and your background.
Sure. I've been working in the commerce space for kind of arguably my entire career. I actually started off as a merchandise broker, calling on the Kroger company, representing a whole host of brands and selling their products into Kroger. And from there, sort of shifted over into the agency landscape in shopper marketing. And then over time, I've just sort of grown up in the space and have spent the last 10 to 12 years heavily focused on e-commerce. And it's interesting because, marketing is a passion of mine and something that I've spent my whole career doing. But I would certainly say I never intentionally set out to create a career in the commerce space. It sort of happened organically over time. But what's been very interesting to me, and as I've advanced further in my career and get deeper and deeper in the space of commerce, what I think I've come to learn about myself is that I have a passion for growth with clients and customers, and I'm a little bit of a student of the world around what makes people take action. And so I'm super fascinated by getting consumers to actually do something, and that do something that I like to see is buying something, because regardless of what vertical you're in, what type of product you're selling, we're all in the business to sell things, right? And I think there's something super fascinating about the e-commerce space that allows us to really be able to see the impact of our work and our effort almost in real time. So commerce has become a passion. It's become kind of my whole world. And I would say I didn't necessarily intend for that when I started down this journey, but it's been a fascinating journey so far, and I'm liking where it's going.
Totally. And it's become a situation where it's rapidly changing by the day. And I think we talk about COVID and even without the impact of the pandemic, which we'll get into in just a little bit, the dynamics of how over the course of your many years at Rockfish and then VML and VMLY&R, the dynamics around how we as customers buy things and goods and services have been changing super, super quickly. Explain some of those dynamics, especially lately, and what you've been seeing.
Sure. And the space was rapidly evolving before 2020. So I kind of won't even get into the impact of the pandemic just yet. But, kind of before, going into 2020, what we've seen is huge channel shifts with consumers and an overarching view of commerce becoming increasingly connected and seamless, where you can buy just about anything, anytime, anywhere. In a lot of cases, you're seeing brands, creating opportunities for, completely touchless commerce, and using things from touchless cards and things like e-wallets and things like that, all the way through to like retinal scans in kiosks that allow you to buy something without touching, without having to really interact with currency and things like that, which is super fascinating. I think what also you started to see is brands that were more traditional retailers, bigger brands, starting to behave more like startups and really lean into innovation and test and learns and self-scanning robots and driverless grocery delivery cars and things like that, where for the longest time, kind of the big behemoths of the industry, your Walmarts, your Krogers, your Walgreens, et cetera, were kind of slow to adopt new technologies and roll out new opportunities because their sheer scale and size would make that, cost prohibitive. And there was this sort of apprehension to new technology, thinking that consumers wouldn't adopt that. And so what you're seeing now is the industry sort of coming to grips with the fact that consumers are adopting new technologies, new channels, new ways of interacting at an increasingly rapid pace. And in order for retail, whether it's online or physical, to keep pace with that, you have to be willing to test and learn and lean into these new technologies. And so now it's a little bit of an arms race for who can bring the next best experience and most innovative and interesting experience to the customer, whether it's online or physically. But on the other side of that, what you are also seeing is a lot of startups and sort of digitally native vertical brands starting to behave more like grown-ups, and kind of, for lack of a better word, and leaning into physical retail, and so taking the experience that they had created and the following that they had amassed online, and then bringing it to a new group of people and a new way of experiencing those brands through physical retail. And you see that with brands like Warby Parker and Casper, and it's interesting because those types of brands really grew up in the online space, and that's where they found their customer base. They were able to utilize real-time insights and co-creation and influencer with their actual shoppers. But when you move into a physical space, you reach a new audience and you get new insights when you are able to actually see consumers interacting with your products and talking with your sales associates, and it unlocks new opportunities for growth and new avenues for optimization and expansion from a customer experience perspective. And so all of this landscape was changing pretty rapidly going into 2020, and it's been a really interesting ride over the last couple of years to see how the space has shifted.
Yeah, I was going to kind of go back to some of that. You mentioned the experience and, how customers, their perception of you. And we talked about this last episode with both John and Jeff. And we talk about perception being your customer experience reality. I think it's super interesting to kind of pry a little bit deeper into what you said about understanding how not only the retailers are having to shift and learn what their customers want, but be in a position to act really quickly. And, some of these bigger teams, the bigger retailers, the bigger brands, as any company I would imagine has gone through, it takes a lot more to move the Titanic, so to speak, than it does when you're those nimble startups. So how much as a commerce lead and a commerce focused professional are you starting to do a lot more, or perhaps as much at minimum, conversations with consumers and understanding kind of when they're buying something, what is their mindset? What is their motivation? Talk to me about kind of the plan to help be a good steward of those retail partners that we and other professionals might have.
It's interesting because it's achievable and certainly a feasible endeavor for us to be on. But on the surface, it seems completely daunting that consumers have an endless supply of touch points and multiple devices and expectations that are exponential. And what's interesting is that they truly expect the brands that they engage with, whether it's on a brand level or with a retailer that is, fulfilling the brands that they want, that them at every point in their journey, at any point of the day, wherever they are, whenever they are, and that they're getting a personalized experience. And that is certainly a daunting task when you think about that from a brand perspective. And especially if you're more of a brand that is, sold through like a third-party retail platform, because
Totally.
now you're even once further removed from the consumer in order to get your product in their hands, but yet you're consistently in a race against consumer expectation. And an expectation that's changing every day and multiple times a day, and often is influenced by other brand experiences that they're having completely unrelated to your category. But yet, if a consumer has a great experience with a brand, they now want that level of service and that level of experience with every other brand. And so it's a very steep uphill climb that I think but also what I find is so interesting about that and fascinating to me is that I don't think there's a summit to the mountain. You're going to keep climbing and the race is never over, because the expectations and what a consumer wants from you changes daily, and that will continue to do so as more opportunities become available to them, more channels, more devices, more anything really. And so there's something inherently fascinating, but also mildly concerning from a brand and a marketer's perspective, knowing that you're racing against time and you're racing as fast as you can to meet these expectations and to win in a space, but that as long as you're kind of going into this with the mindset that there's no finish line. And so every day you get up and you run that race as hard as you can, but
right.
That finish line is going to keep moving. And I think for a lot of clients and a lot of marketers, that's a scary place to be. For me, it's kind of what gets me out of bed in the morning.
I was going to say, it's so much fun. Like that's kind of why we do what we do, right?
Yeah. I kind of love the idea that we're going to go create the next best and next biggest thing for consumers. And then the very next day we got to go do it again. And so the creativity and the strategy and the logic that it takes to win is a consistently moving target, which is, I think, a lot of fun.
Totally. And I guess there's really one example that we can pull out to kind of segue into how COVID has impacted those expectations and how the changing expectations now accelerate even further. But you take the example of, really, you could take two, the idea of click and collect, or like you were mentioning earlier, touchless payment. Those are two things that were potentially looked at, I would imagine, by consumers as a really nice thing to have, but not a game changer, not an absolute mandatory. You shift into a world where COVID has changed expectations and unfortunately, out of fear potentially, or just, general need of, I need to go get my groceries, but I don't want to go in the store. Like big brands, these are retail examples, but really, if you think about it, anybody who's buying or selling is kind of in a similar boat where they kind of have to go back to the drawing board and reassess what they thought they knew about the consumer expectations. And I would imagine those two examples are among many that you've seen in your the last 9 or 10 months and perhaps longer in COVID, as we started to ramp sadly into that dangerous territory. Talk about those accelerating trends and how COVID has put an impact on how you do business as a marketer and a lead of commerce.
Yeah, so 2020 certainly had a very strong, I guess we'll go with strong impact on the business and the way that we see the world. Coming into 2020, and for the last couple of years, you saw a rise in click and collect models, especially in the grocery space. That space was a little slow to pick up initially, and consumers, quite frankly, were a little slow to adopt the technology. There was sort of a reservation from the masses of, this idea of relinquishing control and saying, I can't have some person that I don't know picking out my tomatoes. What if they don't know how to pick out good tomatoes, right? And so there was this hesitation. Slowly but surely, more and more consumers started to adopt that type of experience. And so it was certainly a growing space going into 2020. Then you welcome to 2020, and the kind of everything we know about consumer experience and digital behavior from a commerce perspective kind of got upended, mostly out of necessity. But with necessity, I think, comes great innovation. And so now what you've seen is consumers adopting these, click and collect models, subscription models, things like that, at a rapid pace, to the degree that a couple months ago, the president of Instacart referred to the time here in 2020 as every day is like Black Friday for us. Mm-hmm. And that's how fast the space is changing. And, consumers are now comfortable with that type of interaction. And it's in an accelerated time frame. It went from they are comfortable with it to now they're expecting it. And so in order to survive in this pandemic era, you saw those models then now being leveraged from a whole host of retail, not just grocery, where it was really kind of born out of, from the likes of, you've got curbside delivery for things in beauty, like Ulta Beauty, for example, or Dick's Sporting Goods, things like that. And it's because there was this necessity for being able to transact in real time, and consumers wanting to have the ability to still buy things in this world, but knowing that there were limitations as to whether or not it was safety precautions, whether things were actually closed down. And so you saw those types of models then being applied across a whole host of retail, out of the ability to survive in the space, but also to meet that consumer expectation and that consumer demand, because you have an entire army of consumers now going, well, I can have my groceries delivered to my house, or I can have my groceries brought out to my car. I should be able to buy sporting equipment because I'm at home and with my kids, and I got to keep them entertained. And so if someone can take my groceries out to my car for me, why can't somebody take my need for a new ball and bat and glove, right? And so you saw a lot of retail adopting that type of technology and things pretty quickly. The thing that was interesting, though, is that's not actually an easy thing to stand up.
Totally.
The fulfillment logistics on the back end are mildly daunting, because what you're now doing is you're turning every single retail location that you have into a distribution center. Mm-hmm. And so your consumers are needing to be able to buy things on what they're seeing as a singular website, or a singular entity or platform, but having the ability to have the items that they want are available at the store that's 5 miles from their house, versus sitting in a warehouse somewhere that's going to get mailed out. And so these types of adoption of the platform from a consumer perspective was happening much faster than I think the industry could necessarily keep up with the pace, because the logistical backends to make those experiences true is no small feat.
Well, and what's interesting about that too, I think, is you look at the digital natives that, and we'll just use Amazon as an example, they have been investing in what? Physical space. I mean, I'm sure technology and infrastructure and all that stuff, but one of the big things that, the traditional guys, as you talk about, the evolution of how we adapt to these customer experiences, the big guys who have lots of physical space potentially have something that those digital startups, those digital natives, even the digital incumbents like Amazon, they just don't have, and they have to invest in, because now all of a sudden, your 10,000 store footprint becomes a super relevant and super important business advantage, because now all of a sudden, like you mentioned, it's not just a store anymore. It's also a fulfillment center, perhaps a pickup. I mean, even we saw, what was it, Walmart trying to go out there and turn in smaller locations into these kind of pick and collect centers for fulfillment. It is fascinating, and I imagine that as you work with brands, there is a lot of work that has to be done in supply chain too. So it's not only do these people have to have the infrastructure set up, but you have to have the information to know that this piece of product or something that you're going to sell is available at that exact moment, at that exact location, so that you can come and click and collect, which is just a daunting undertaking, I would imagine.
Exactly. And to just to add to the difficulty and things that have to be considered, speaking of supply chain, then you flash forward to sort of Q4 of 2020 when you get into the holiday season and arguably the biggest retail time frame of the year with Black Friday, Cyber Monday, the Singles Day with Alibaba, all of those types of things. And even this year you layered on with Prime Day being delayed when Prime Day typically occurs in the July time frame.
Right.
Now got pushed out closer to the holidays. What you're experiencing is substantial pressure on the supply chain from a delivery fulfillment standpoint, because you've got all of these consumers shopping online in these huge retail environments at a time when they're typically doing that, but they're also marrying their holiday shopping behaviors with in-store, and their shopping behavior is shifted online. And so this massive influx of packages that have to get shipped out and delivered to consumers in a time frame that's going to be conducive with holiday gift giving and things like that. You also have families can't get together, so you're shipping more gifts to family versus bringing them to the holiday party, that type of thing. And so all of this sort of creates this perfect storm of fulfillment that also weighs heavily on the consumer mindset, because consumers on a broad level are very anxious about this. So you also saw an influx of heavy shopping moved up. And so instead of kind of the crush of December shopping, you saw substantial spikes in online shopping behaviors in the month of November, which was really the consumer mindset of fear in terms of shipping challenges that may or may not occur, knowing that there's this giant influx of online shopping. And so if everyone's doing this simultaneously, there's got to be a huge strain on the system in order to actually fulfill that level of demand. There were some interesting solves that are, I say solves in quotes, but solves that I think some retailers, took some concerted efforts to try to ease that pressure, both on themselves from a supply chain perspective, but also to ease the pressure on consumers from an anxiety perspective. You saw things like Target and Home Depot and a whole host of others extending the time frame, and instead of saying Black Friday sales, doorbusters, everything was all about Black Friday, they extended Black Friday for the entire month of November and offered those prices and those promotions and deals for an entire month. And from a consumer lens, that feels really good, and it feels like, oh, this consumer or this retailer cares about me and is trying to help me. But really what they were doing is alleviating their own supply chain pressures, but in a smart way. Yeah. And what we've seen in the dollars and in the results from Black Friday purchases and arguably the entire month of November purchases are up pretty substantially. I want to say about 21% up year over year. And so clearly it's working. You even saw, Singles Day, the Alibaba is the biggest retail event of the year. And there's certainly no shortage of growth that would happen there. And I think no one, expected different. But I don't know that anyone expected quite what we saw this year, which was that Singles Day sales were up 85%. They did almost $79 billion in sales. And really the biggest shift that they made was, instead of making it a one-day retail event, they made it an 11-day retail event. And again, part of that, from a consumer perspective, it feels like an event. It feels like you're trying as a retailer to accommodate them. And you are. I'm certainly not suggesting that the retailers don't care about their customers. They absolutely do. But ultimately, those types of decisions are made in order to alleviate the pressure on the back end from a fulfillment standpoint and try to ease the burden of a crush of holiday shopping all happening online simultaneously.
Yeah, and I think what is really cool about it is it's unlocked the ability in all of this. If there's silver lining, if there's such a thing, or positives that you talk about, the development of the industry, is that it has unlocked a whole bunch of really new, not only experiences, experiences, but different ways to market and to create really cool experiences for buyers and shoppers. And I think brand building at the commerce layer, thinking tactically for the moment, for those that are listening to the podcast that are thinking, well, how do I impact the work that I'm doing, or how can I shift my focus? How can I do better in winning digital shelf and creating experiences for customers that will not only be able to play in these different fulfillment models that you just talked about, but also be in a position to make somebody go, that was really interesting. That's a new experience I didn't expect, or maybe an experience I didn't expect in this particular category vertical. Thinking of things like the live streaming events that you start seeing on Amazon. I know that was something that was huge at Singles Day too. Talk about the big keys to success in evolving that digital shelf in the experience era.
I think one of the first things that, and I would hope that brands are doing this now, but from what I see that there's still a lot of legacy behavior and processes that have to, find their way out of the system. But I certainly urge brands and, brand managers, brand leaders to strive to plan without what I'm calling funnel vision, and thinking about the marketing funnel in the historically the way that we think about it in kind of this linear fashion of awareness to consideration to conversion. Those three things still very much exist for a consumer, but they happen in many cases simultaneously now. And so when you think about your brand and brand awareness and what it means to build your brand, what you stand for, what's your equity, how does it show up in the world, putting those building blocks in place in commerce first and in commerce platforms, and you really utilizing those platforms as brand building tools, not thinking about commerce separately from brand, thinking about when upwards of 70% of product searches start on a retailer site, not on Google. And when a consumer goes to a retailer site for product search, it is not always because they intend to buy that product on that particular retailer or even right now. Consumers are now predisposed to know that if they go to a retailer to look up a product or learn something about a product that they're interested in, they're going to find the information that they want there. They're going to have access to things like ratings and reviews, and those things matter. And so you're not Googling XYZ product to find out more about it. You're going to Amazon or you're going to Walmart and you're typing that in because you want that experience. So brands have to think of those platforms as owned channels. And while they don't own the channel, they do own their experience on the pages that they show up on. You certainly have limitations within the platform that you have to live within, restrictions, but that's still your space to create the experience that you want your consumer to have with your brand. And if we're not planning for and thinking through using those platforms sort of first and thinking about them as the new brand.com, it's a huge miss as a brand because that's where the consumers are and that's where they're seeking out that information. Having those brand building tools in place is more important, not just from a brand equity standpoint. You certainly, when a consumer gets to your page or your experience, you want them to have the interactions with the brand that are in line with your equity and what you want your brand to stand for. But there's more to it than that. You have to have all of the right content in place in order to win search. And winning search means winning everything. And digital shelf is a really interesting environment because every keyword is arguably a new shelf or a new planogram. So if a consumer types in something and they scan the page and in page one they don't find what they're looking for, first of all, they're never going to page two. But second of all, what they're going to do, they're not. But the next thing they're going to do is they're going to go back to the search bar and they're going to refine their search, which then will bring them a whole new host of responses. So every keyword is an aisle. Every keyword is a new planogram. And so it's not like if you try to equate it to a real life planogram, in a retail environment, consumers don't wander up and down the aisles when they can't find something, or if they can in that environment, but the aisle itself doesn't change. They just wander around until they find what they're looking for. They go and ask an associate, and they're really not going to do that. I would also argue that expecting a consumer to click on a page 2 of search results is akin to expecting them to go find a stock person in a store and ask if they have a product in the back. No one's going to do that, right?
That's right.
And so winning search is the most critical component. But in order to do that, your content has to be robust and well thought through strategically in terms of what are the types of keywords that you have a right to win and you have a right to own, and making sure that you're available and showing up for the natural language and the way that consumers speak, and because what they're searching for is, in the words they're using to search for things, is how you show up. And so there's always a little dichotomy from a brand building perspective in the retail and commerce environment for what does a consumer say about you or about the space versus what does a brand want to say. And sometimes those things are at odds with each other, and getting brands to be comfortable with the fact that every part of that experience starts with how the consumer engages. And so it's really up to them to initiate it. And so you have to meet them where they are and speak the language that they're speaking in order to initiate that conversation.
Yeah, and it just speaks to the importance of understanding the customer journey and thinking through, and you even talked about it, is being able to get outside of the idea of, okay, what is the brand experience? And then being able to understand the journey of the customer, where they are, even if they're happening, moments in the journey are happening simultaneously, being in a position to know not only how to get them to see your product, but then once they see the product, how can you prove the promise with content and potentially, other user-generated information like ratings and reviews to help give the user the confidence, the customer the confidence to make that next step. And it all ties back to what we've talked about in our previous episode, and we talk about at VMLY&R a lot, which is brand experience and customer experience working in tandem. It's super interesting, and we could talk about this stuff all day. But I'd love to kind of wrap things up before we run out of time. Getting a chance to know you a little bit more and talking less about the business stuff and more about the personal stuff and get to know you a little bit. Sound good?
Sure.
Awesome. Well, I know we're in the holiday season. We're recording this podcast in early December. We're coming off of Thanksgiving, as we talked about. And I want you to share a story about what your Thanksgiving looked like, because to those who don't know JB, there's something a story I think you would be willing to share with us about what you did this year and how you kind of worked through the pandemic craziness to deliver a pretty memorable Thanksgiving. Will you tell us what you did?
Yeah. So, typically Thanksgiving is what I call my holiday, and it's my favorite day of the year. And I typically host actually both sides of the family. So, my family and my in-laws, and I make everything. I'm kind of known in the family as the queen of Thanksgiving.
Well, your last name is Baker. I suppose that's fair.
That's true. And I make all of the things and kind of control the whole experience. And because I'm a little bit of a control freak, but also I love it so much. And so obviously this year we couldn't all get together, and that was really sad. And so, we could have thrown the year out the window and said, let's hope for a better 2021. But instead I had the idea of, what if my husband and I created the experience that we offer and that we deliver to our families every year, and we brought it to them. And so I literally created the entire Thanksgiving meal, all of the desserts, all of the meal, down to everything that I make year over year over year. And then we packaged it all up, and we got in our little, jokingly, my little catering van, and we drove it around the city and brought it to our families. So while we couldn't be together, we could all experience the Thanksgiving tradition that we've come to know over many years, separately but together.
You were Thanksgiving DoorDash. That's what you were.
A little bit, yeah, except I didn't get any tips. but I don't do it for the money. I do it for the
That's right.
the adoration of my loyal fans.
Yes, and but now here's the problem with that. You've just reset expectations. Speaking of customer experience, you've just reset the expectations, JB.
I know. I know.
That's all right.
But I also felt like I had set the expectations, all the years leading up to this.
That's
fair. So I just couldn't.
That's fair.
I couldn't bring myself to just not let Thanksgiving be true for the family. They literally would talk to me all year about how they look forward to this day and it's their favorite meal of the day or of the year. And so I couldn't let them down. And so I feel like we got a little creative. And so we kept our tradition and we augmented it a little for 2020.
You're nothing if not creative. Speaking of holiday stuff, as we get down into the later stages of the year, I know Thanksgiving you just mentioned is one of your favorites. You've got a son, Jackson, and obviously the holidays are so much fun for the kids. But what kind of holiday traditions do you have as you lead up to Christmas break?
Well, we have been very heavily involved with this year so far with the Elf on the Shelf. My son kind of loves he actually has two. Their names are Rocky and Kevin, and they come every year once the tree is up. And so we always put the tree up the day after Thanksgiving, and then that's sort of the symbol to the North Pole that it's time for Rocky and Kevin to come back. And so they have, and so they've been with us for a couple weeks now, and we are having a lot of fun with little games and leaving them treats at night and things like that. And then
Totally.
There's just so much joy when he wakes up in the morning and goes running out to look at the mantle to see what they have done or where they are and did they eat the treats he left them last night and those types of things. And so we're very into that right now, and we're also into Christmas lists. I feel like he makes a new list every single day. And so much like the rest of the world, I'm online shopping like a crazy person. And
I think running out.
My front step just looks like an Amazon fulfillment center. And so, it's been a lot of shopping and a lot of entertaining the child and getting him excited as Christmas gets closer around his elves.
You want to get lost. You want to get lost in a wormhole. You got to go to Pinterest and see all the different ideas that the different elves around the proverbial world have come up with over the years for Elf on the Shelf. It is definitely one of those things you can get stuck in hours of swiping and scrolling through all the different examples, or just take some inspiration.
Yes, I've done it, and I'm like, oh no, I'm not signing up for that commitment.
Negative. JB, awesome conversation today. Really enjoyed it. Thank you for all of the time and the insight. Great catching up with you.
Thank you so much for having me. It was fun.
And thanks to you all for listening to Human Center. We'd love to hear your feedback on the show too. Please give us a rating and offer up your thoughts wherever you listen to your podcasts, including Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Amazon, and more. Have a topic idea or just want to drop us a line? You can do that too through email. It's humancentered@vmlyr.com. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time.